Rain was falling the way it only does on Bay Area evenings, steady, cold, and honest. Bethany stood under the small awning of her front porch, calling out to her twins as they hopped out of the car, their laughter hitting the air like tiny sparks. Samuel tugged at his jacket zipper. Peter ran ahead with his backpack swinging. She didn't notice the man standing across the street, but he saw everything. Craig stood frozen beside his black sedan, rain soaking through the shoulders of his suit, his breathing shallow. He wasn't blinking. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the two little boys racing toward her, boys with the exact tilt of his smile, the same brow line, the same unmistakable DNA stamped across their faces. His voice cracked into the night, barely louder than the rain. "Those are my sons." His words weren't proud. They weren't joyful. They were stunned, frightened, and full of a guilt he finally felt in his bones. Bethany gathered the boys close, unlocking the front door with one hand while nudging them inside with gentle instructions about washing up before dinner. Her curls clung slightly to her cheeks from the mist. Her voice carried warmth, the kind she had built on her own, brick by emotional brick. Craig had no right to watch that moment. But he did. He stood there, a man facing the consequences he once thought he could ignore. Now let me ask you something. What do you do when the person who once told you that you were nothing suddenly has to confront the truth he tried to erase? How do you protect your peace when the past shows up without warning, staring at the children you raised alone? These are questions many people know too well, the questions that arrive when someone who once treated you like you didn't matter suddenly wants access to the life you built without them. Craig wasn't just shocked, he was cracking open from the inside. Because 4 years ago he told Bethany something no woman should ever hear from the father of her child. Abort it. You're nothing to me. Tonight, he was seeing the reality of that cruelty wearing matching sneakers and holding superhero lunchboxes. He stepped back as if the truth had weight. And it did. This is where our story begins, not with calm introductions, not with gentle memories, but with a confrontation life forced on a man who thought his money could shield him from consequences. Craig had no idea that the moment he laid eyes on those twins would pull him into a fight Bethany never wanted, a fight that would drag both of them into courtrooms, family battles, and a choice he should have made years earlier. A battle ignited not by love, but by guilt, entitlement, and the cold machinery of a powerful family that believed they had a right to children they never cared to meet. Before we go any further, stay with me, because the way this story unfolds will shake you, anger you, soften you, and challenge you. And the lesson at the heart of it, the one Bethany earns, is something every parent, every woman, every survivor, and every person rebuilding their life needs to hear. But first, a quick favor. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions help this channel reach more people who need stories like this. Stories about truth, strength, and real human growth. So before we continue, go ahead and tap those buttons. It helps more than you think. Now, let's step into the beginning of Bethany's journey. Not the moment she met Craig, not the moment she fell for him, but the moment her life demanded strength, long before he ever saw her twins standing in the rain. Before her name ever appeared on architectural proposals or community design plans in California, Bethany Brown was simply a young woman on the southeast side of Milwaukee, trying to make sense of a world that asked too much of her too early. Her neighborhood carried its own rhythm, not glamorous, not polished, but alive. Kids played double dutch on cracked sidewalks, uncles fixed their cars with half a tool set, and aunties on porches settled disputes and raised half the block with nothing but firm voices and sharper wisdom. It was a place where survival depended on connection, and connection depended on honesty. Bethany was raised in a small 2-bedroom home where her mother held the family together with quiet strength. Her older sister, Felicia, emerged early as the anchor, clear-minded, structured, and calm under pressure. Bethany, meanwhile, observed the world like a puzzle that could be reshaped if she paid close enough attention. Where others saw limits, she saw potential lines, angles, and spaces waiting to be rearranged. Their mother used to say they were two halves of a map. Felicia found the direction. Bethany redesigned the terrain. Bethany didn't grow up surrounded by wealth or influence. Instead, she absorbed the discipline of early mornings, shared meals, and a community that protected one another. When her mother passed away, grief didn't hit once. It lingered like a weight no one could fully remove. Felicia stepped into adulthood too quickly, and Bethany tried to outrun pain by pouring herself into school. Architecture wasn't just a subject to her. It felt like a language she already understood. She saw buildings as stories. She saw layout choices as expressions of dignity. A home wasn't walls, it was possibility. A public space wasn't concrete, it was community. Her professors noticed early on that she didn't design for aesthetics alone. She designed for people. Her drafts weren't flashy, but they made sense. They were livable, respectful, sturdy. That talent eventually earned her a fellowship in San Francisco, a position that cracked open a door she hadn't imagined stepping through. Milwaukee had taught her to be strong. San Francisco would test how far that strength could stretch. When Bethany arrived in the Bay Area, she felt both small and unstoppable. The hills, the fog, the crowded transportation, everything moved faster than she did, but she met it head-on the same way she had faced every challenge growing up. She landed inexpensive housing on the outskirts of the city and took buses to the office. She worked late. She listened carefully in meetings. She didn't try to stand out. She tried to be useful. But life had a way of pulling her into spaces she never planned for. Balfour Holdings wasn't the kind of company where people like Bethany typically had influence. It was a corporation shaped by wealth, steered by legacy, and maintained by people who valued power over community. She was assigned as a junior consultant to assist on a commercial development project, not to lead it, not to shake anything up. But Bethany didn't fade into the background. On her second week, she stood in a conference room adjusting a flawed model someone else had presented, unable to ignore the design flaws. The hallways were too narrow. The outdoor access points didn't match human traffic movement. The project lacked empathy, a common issue in rooms where decisions were made from spreadsheets rather than lived reality. She didn't realize someone was watching her. "You're new," a voice said from behind. She didn't flinch. "Temporary, actually. You're fixing the entire building model." "Because people actually walk through hallways," she replied without looking up. She didn't deliver the line with attitude. She delivered it with truth. Her tone was calm, grounded, matter-of-fact. And the man behind her, Craig Balfour, the heir of the company, wasn't accustomed to truth spoken without fear. Craig represented everything she wasn't. Where she learned discipline through hardship, he learned authority through birthright. He grew up in rooms where people adjusted their tone to suit him. His education came with prestige. His decisions carried weight even before he earned them. But something in Bethany's clarity disarmed him. He found himself returning to her workspace more often, leaning against door frames, asking questions he didn't need answers to. She didn't treat him differently because of his status. She spoke to him like a person, not a title. And for reasons he couldn't articulate, it made him gravitate toward her. Meetings grew into conversations. Conversations stretched past office hours. Shared frustrations over late revisions became small moments of connection neither of them named out loud. Bethany didn't chase him. Craig didn't plan her. Their connection formed the way storms do, quietly at first, almost unnoticed. And though she didn't know it yet, this shift in her world would lead her toward the breaking point that would change everything. Bethany had never intended to become close to anyone at Balfour Holdings, much less the man whose name was etched into the building's marble entrance. Her goal was simple: finish the fellowship, leave with new experience, and return to work that felt purposeful. But Craig kept showing up in the corners of her days, in doorways, near drafting tables, or beside models she thought no one noticed her adjusting. It began subtly. A question here, a comment there, a brief exchange that stretched longer than either planned. Craig wasn't used to working beside someone who didn't measure their worth against his approval. Bethany didn't flirt. She didn't shrink. She didn't force conversation. She simply existed with a clarity that grounded him in ways he had never felt. One late evening, the office had thinned to only janitorial staff and two developers arguing quietly several floors down. Bethany stayed behind reviewing load calculations and sketching out a revised corridor layout. She didn't expect Craig to appear, especially not dressed down in rolled sleeves and a loosened tie, looking less like the heir of a dynasty and more like a man tired of performing. "You're here again," he said, leaning on the edge of her table. She didn't look up. "Someone has to correct the plan before the meeting tomorrow. You say that like the responsibility is yours. It becomes mine if the design affects people." Craig studied her for a moment. "Most people don't care that much." She shrugged. "Then most people shouldn't design buildings." Her tone wasn't sharp. It was honest. And honesty was the one thing his world rarely offered him. He stepped closer, watching her pencil move across the paper with precise strokes. Her concentration made the air around her feel different, focused, calm, steady. Craig realized he had no idea how to speak to someone who didn't tilt toward him. "You work like the outcome matters to you personally," he said. "It does." "Why?" She paused, finally lifting her eyes. "Because people live in the things we create. They raise families, build moments, escape from stress, find comfort, or they don't, because someone designed carelessly. Her words weren't poetic. They were rooted in lived reality. Craig felt something shift in him, not through romance or attraction, but through exposure to perspective he had never considered. The room grew quieter. Spaces feel different when two people begin to understand each other without saying so. "You know," he said softly, "you're not like anyone I've worked with." "Good," she replied. "I'm not trying to be." He exhaled a short laugh, surprised by how refreshing her presence felt. They kept talking, not about the project, but about life. Not deeply, but enough to see the contrast between their worlds. She spoke about Milwaukee, about the people who shaped her, about her mother's resilience and Felicia's determination. He listened more than he spoke. She watched him unlearn parts of himself without realizing that it was happening. For the first time in a long time, Craig wasn't performing. He wasn't the heir. He wasn't the CEO in waiting. He was just a man trying to make sense of someone who made him reconsider what mattered. Hours slipped by. At some point, Bethany's hand trembled slightly as she stretched, the fatigue catching up to her. Craig noticed immediately. "You should get some rest," he murmured. "So should you." "I don't have a good excuse," he replied. "You have a better one." She shook her head lightly. "I'm just tired." Craig stepped behind her, not too close, but close enough to see the pencil loosen between her fingers. Her shoulders rose and fell with the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying too many expectations at once. "Bethany," he said quietly, "put it down for a moment." She didn't know why she listened, but she did. The pencil dropped to the table, landing beside a half-drawn floor plan. When she turned around, she found him watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something open, something human. He didn't reach for her right away. He hesitated. "Can I?" he asked, lifting a hand slightly but not completing the gesture. His restraint told her more than any confident advance ever could. Her breath steadied. "Craig, what do you want?" The question softened him. His gaze lowered for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "Not business," he whispered. "Not tonight." For a man raised in a world that punished vulnerability, the admission felt raw. He stepped closer, moving with caution rather than entitlement. Bethany's heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from the rare sensation of someone removing their armor in her presence. He reached for her face slowly, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. When his hand touched her cheek, it wasn't forceful. It wasn't urgent. It was careful. A gesture that surprised even him. Bethany leaned into the warmth without meaning to. Her breath mingled with his, and in that soft moment under the hum of late-night fluorescent lights, she saw more than the confident air she met on her first week. She saw a man carrying weight he never learned how to put down. Their lips met gently, not rushed, not hungry, but curious. The kiss wasn't an escape. It was an acknowledgement of something neither planned. His touch stayed respectful, his thumb brushing her jaw lightly. She responded with equal softness, letting herself feel something she didn't expect to feel around a man like him. When the kiss deepened, it carried the entire tension of weeks spent side by side, speaking truths without realizing they were building a connection. His hand slid to the back of her neck, guiding her closer in a way that felt steady, not possessive. She held onto his shirt lightly, grounding herself. It wasn't passion that defined their moment, it was vulnerability. Two people letting themselves be seen, just for a night. They didn't speak right away after pulling apart. Craig rested his forehead against hers, breathing quietly, as though he wasn't sure if the moment belonged to him or to fate. Bethany didn't break the silence either. She let it settle, warm and unexpected. For a brief moment, she believed he was capable of choosing her. She didn't know that outside that room, the pressures that shaped him were already tightening their grip. She didn't know that this night, fragile and sincere, would become the memory she held onto when everything else fell apart. The morning Bethany decided to tell Craig she was pregnant started like any other. Cool air drifted in through her apartment window, carrying the faint scent of coffee brewing downstairs in a neighbor's unit. She stood in front of her small mirror, steadying her breath as she smoothed down her blouse. Nothing about her appearance revealed the storm inside her. Her hands shook only once, and she gripped the sink until they stopped. She rehearsed the moment in her head. He'll be shocked. Maybe confused. Maybe scared. But he'll listen. He cared enough to let his guard down. He cared enough to show a piece of himself that night. He cared enough to choose vulnerability, even briefly. She held on to that memory like hope itself. At Balfour Holdings, the energy was firmer than usual. Executives moving briskly, assistants juggling documents, meetings spilling into hallways. Something felt orchestrated from the top, and it carried tension she couldn't name. Still, she pushed forward. Craig's assistant told her he was in his office preparing for a board briefing, but could see her for a moment. Her heart thudded. A moment was all she needed. She knocked on his glass door lightly, then stepped inside. Craig didn't look up immediately. He was signing documents, flipping through files, adjusting notes with the precision of someone under intense pressure. His suit was sharper today, his posture more rigid. The warmth she saw in him on late nights was nowhere in sight. "Craig," she said gently. He glanced up, eyes tightening around the edges. He didn't offer her a seat. He didn't smile. He didn't shift from the persona she'd first encountered during her early days. The heir, the future CEO, the man molded by legacy instead of choice. "Before you say anything," he said quickly, "there's something I should have told you earlier." Bethany swallowed. Her fingers grazed the edge of her bag where the pregnancy test was wrapped in tissue. "Okay." He leaned back and exhaled, but there was no relief in it, only the kind of detachment taught to men in positions like his. "I'm stepping into a larger role. The board has expectations. Complications aren't ideal right now." "Complications?" she repeated quietly. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Anything that pulls focus, anything that shifts attention. I can't have distractions." Her stomach tightened. "Craig, I need to tell you something important." He cut her off. "If this is about us," he said carefully, "it can't continue. I can't give you anything. Not a relationship, not time, not a future." Something inside her deflated, but she steadied herself. "Craig, I understand if you're upset," he added, still not looking at her. "But this is reality." Her breath wavered, but she pushed forward. "I'm pregnant." Silence thickened the room instantly. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't even pretend to reach for her hand. His expression emptied, all softness stripped away. "Bethany," he said slowly, "you need to take care of it." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Take care of..." Her voice cracked. "You can't keep it." His tone sharpened with clipped precision. "This will ruin everything. I don't want this." He finally looked at her, but the gaze carried nothing she recognized. No vulnerability, no warmth, no trace of the man who held her gently in the quiet hours of a long work night. "And frankly," he added, "you're nothing to me in that way." Her breath caught in her throat. Her pulse rang in her ears. She stared at him, trying to reconcile the man she thought she'd glimpsed with the stranger standing in front of her. "You're asking me to get rid of our child?" she whispered. "Our mistake," he corrected, sliding a check across his pristine glass desk. The pen was already uncapped, as if he had planned for this possibility long before she walked in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't apologize. He didn't hesitate. His tone carried the coldness of someone who grew up believing emotions were liabilities. Bethany felt something inside her begin to fracture, not all at once, but slowly, like a crack running across a foundation she had trusted. Her vision blurred for a moment, but she blinked the tears back. She would not cry in front of him. She would not give him that. "I'm not for sale," she said quietly. He said nothing. The silence itself felt dismissive. She left before her strength wavered. She walked down the hallway, straight-backed, refusing to let anyone see the pieces of her falling internally. Every step felt heavier, the floor stretching longer than it should. The building she once admired now felt like a reminder of how easily people like her could be dismissed. Outside, the San Francisco wind stung her cheeks. She inhaled sharply, grounding herself. She did not go back to her desk. She did not finish her shift. She did not send a formal resignation. She packed her things in silence, ignoring messages, ignoring looks. She didn't owe explanations to a place that saw her as expendable. By nightfall, Felicia was booking her a flight without asking a single unnecessary question. By sunrise, Bethany was in an airplane seat, tears tracking silently down her face as the city she once hoped would reshape her future shrank beneath clouds. She placed a hand over her stomach. Her voice cracked in a whisper no one heard. "I choose you." She didn't know she was choosing two lives. She didn't know the strength she'd need. She didn't know the price she would pay for walking away. But as the plane climbed higher, sunlight breaking through cloud cover, she held onto one truth. Craig's cruelty would not define her children. Not then. Not ever. And so began the hardest, most defining chapter of her life, the one she would build without him. San Francisco greeted Bethany without softness. The moment she stepped out of the airport terminal, the wind pressed against her like a reminder that nothing ahead would come easy. She clutched her small suitcase with one hand and held her coat closed with the other, exhaustion clinging to her body from days of holding herself together after Craig's dismissal. She moved through the city the same way she survived Milwaukee, attentive, alert, and stubborn enough to keep moving even when the ground felt unstable beneath her feet. She rented a small, aging studio in a quiet neighborhood tucked behind eucalyptus trees and narrow streets. The walls were thin, the floor creaked, and the heater worked only when it felt cooperative. But it was hers, a place to breathe without judgment, a place where no one would hand her a check and try to pay her silence. Her first weeks were brutal. Morning sickness hit at unpredictable hours. The fatigue was heavier than she expected. It settled in her bones, leaving her fighting to stay awake through contract assignments and drafting work she picked up from local firms seeking temporary help. She often worked from her small table or at the library when her apartment felt too cramped. Money stretched thin. Fear stretched even thinner. But something else stretched with equal strength, her will. She reminded herself daily that she chose this child. She chose life. She chose dignity over convenience. She chose to walk away from a man who spoke to her like her existence held no value. Still, there were nights when she curled on her couch, hand over her stomach, whispering into the shadows, "I hope I'm enough for you." She didn't have to be enough alone, though. She didn't realize how quickly the community around her would rise. The Bay Area's Black community wrapped around her like steady arms she didn't expect. The woman upstairs, Ms. Lenora, knocked on her door one evening holding a bowl of homemade stew, saying, "You look like you haven't eaten today, baby." Mothers at the hair salon passed her prenatal advice between stories of their own children. Men outside the barber shop offered to carry her grocery bags without prying into her life. A couple from down the hallway left gently used baby items outside her door with a small note, "For when you're ready." Bethany wasn't used to accepting help. Milwaukee taught her self-sufficiency, but motherhood taught her humility. She began to see that strength wasn't only in doing everything alone, it was also in allowing people to care when they chose to. And the deeper she settled into pregnancy, the more her body forced her to slow down. She learned to sit when she needed to inhale deeply when dizziness came, to rest without guilt. Her belly rounded quicker than she expected, and she often found herself in front of the mirror, fingertips tracing the curve with awe. During her second trimester appointment, she lay quietly on the examination bed while the doctor moved the ultrasound wand gently across her abdomen. The room hummed with soft equipment sounds, her heart beating in a rhythm she couldn't calm. "Bethany," the doctor said carefully, eyes widening as she examined the image more closely, "you might want to sit up a little." Her breath hitched. "Is something wrong?" A smile tugged at the doctor's lips. "No, not at all. But there are 2 heartbeats." Bethany blinked. 2. "You're carrying twins." Her hand flew to her mouth as tears welled, thick and immediate. Shock broke first, then laughter, then more tears. "Of course it's 2, she whispered. "Life doesn't do anything halfway. Twins, 2 children, 2 lives she would raise with everything she had." When she walked home that day, she held her belly differently. Not protectively, lovingly. She whispered names without knowing she was speaking them into permanence. Samuel. Peter. Samuel reminded her of quiet strength. Peter reminded her of foundation, something that would hold steady even when the world shifted. She felt less alone once their names existed. But pregnancy came with challenges she didn't always anticipate. Nights of discomfort, mornings of nausea, moments of fear that tightened her chest when she worried about finances. Yet every time insecurity swelled, she pressed her palm against her belly and felt the faintest flutter, a reminder that something bigger than fear was growing inside her. Her sister, Felicia, visited monthly. She walked into Bethany's apartment like she owned half the city, carrying bags of groceries and legal documents like she was preparing for war. "You're glowing," Felicia would say, even though Bethany looked exhausted. "You lie," Bethany would reply, though her smile always softened. They discussed baby supplies, potential living arrangements, and Bethany's long-term plans once the twins were born. Felicia's presence grounded her. It brought Milwaukee back into the room, reminding her of their mother's resilience and the unspoken rule that the brown women didn't crumble. They adapted, Bethany spent evenings sketching revised layouts for local clients or creating small architectural proposals she hoped someone would eventually fund. Work wasn't glamorous, but it kept her connected to the part of herself she refused to abandon. San Francisco wasn't kind, but it wasn't cruel either. It was indifferent, and Bethany learned how to carve space inside its indifference. She learned which corner stores sold affordable produce, which bus routes were safest after dark, which hours of the day her energy was strongest. She learned to place a small pillow behind her back when she worked too long, and she learned how to budget her days with precision. She never once considered returning to Craig. Not even on the hardest nights. Not even when fear crept into her bones. She chose her babies. She chose her dignity. She chose a future built from truth, not compromise. And slowly, between doctor visits and late-night drafts, between whispered prayers and tired laughter, she became someone new, not someone different, but someone fuller. By the time her 7th month arrived, Bethany felt a sense of steadiness she didn't expect. She knew motherhood would break and rebuild her in ways she couldn't predict. But she also knew one thing with unshakable certainty. She was ready to meet Samuel and Peter, and she would face whatever came next, alone, if necessary. What she didn't know was how profoundly their arrival would transform every part of her world. The final weeks of Bethany's pregnancy moved slowly, like time itself was teaching her patience. Her body felt heavier each day, and the simplest tasks, tying her shoes, stepping out of bed, lifting bags of groceries, became careful negotiations between strength and exhaustion. But she kept going. She always kept going. By the time she entered her 9th month, she had developed a routine that worked. She woke early, drank warm water with lemon, stretched gently, and walked to the small community garden 3 blocks away where older women gathered in the mornings. They always greeted her with open arms and warm smiles. "You're carrying blessings," one of them said, touching her belly lightly. Bethany would smile through the discomfort, grateful for the affirmation she didn't always know she needed. But soon the early morning walks became too taxing. The days grew longer. The twins moved constantly inside her, as if reminding her, "We're almost here." Felicia made one final visit before the due date, bringing a suitcase that she placed in the corner of the apartment. "You need to have this ready," she insisted. "Labor doesn't care about timing." Bethany rolled her eyes gently. "I know." Felicia pointed at the suitcase again. "No, you think you know." Big difference. Their banter softened Bethany's fears, but when Felicia left that evening, the apartment felt both quiet and full. Quiet because she was alone again, full because she was holding 2 lives within her. She didn't know the birth would come sooner than expected. It happened on a Wednesday night. The fog outside had settled low, and the streetlights glowed dimly through her window. Bethany was finishing a small drafting assignment for a local store remodel when a sharp, rolling wave of pain tightened her abdomen. She gasped, gripping the edge of her table. Another wave came minutes later. Her breath hitched. It was time. She gathered herself, grabbed the suitcase Felicia had insisted on packing, and called a rideshare to the hospital. The driver spoke little, but his worried glances in the rearview mirror carried enough concern for 2 people. At the hospital, nurses rushed to guide her into a room. The overhead lights felt too bright, but the staff moved with practiced efficiency, checking her vitals and adjusting monitors while offering soft encouragement. "You're doing great," one nurse said, as Bethany squeezed her hand through a contraction. She didn't feel great. She felt overwhelmed. She felt terrified. She felt powerful. Labor stretched across hours that blurred into one long moment. She lost track of time. She lost track of everything except the rhythm of her breathing and the steady voices anchoring her. Push. Breathe. You're almost there. And then, a cry. Bethany felt her heart rise in her chest, breaking open in ways she didn't expect. One of the twins had arrived, small, loud, alive. Tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't even wipe them away. Moments later, another cry filled the room. The second twin. 2 voices she had waited months to hear. The nurses wrapped the boys gently and placed them on her chest. Their bodies were warm, their movements small but determined. One nestled his cheek against her, the other curled his tiny fingers around her thumb. Samuel. Peter. The names fit instantly. She whispered them like promises. The world outside ceased to exist. For the first time since Craig told her she was nothing, she felt a sense of wholeness rise inside her. These boys weren't a burden. They weren't a mistake. They were her purpose, her redemption, her new foundation. Through the exhaustion, she whispered, "I've got you. I'm here. Always, The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, learning curves, and discoveries she didn't know she was capable of managing. The twins woke at alternating hours, often crying just as she managed to close her eyes. Feedings were constant. Diaper changes felt endless. Some nights she cried quietly, overwhelmed by fatigue and the weight of responsibility. But every morning she woke with her boys lying beside her on the small bed, their tiny chests rising and falling in steady rhythm. Their presence rebuilt her at a pace nothing else in her life ever had. The community didn't disappear. If anything, they drew closer. Miss Lenora helped with laundry on weekends. The couple across the hall brought home-cooked meals. The ladies at the garden visited one afternoon with baby blankets they knitted themselves. "You need a break," they insisted. Bethany didn't refuse. She was learning to accept support without shame. As months passed, she slowly began integrating work again. Not full-time, but small architectural drafting jobs that she completed during nap times or late nights. She transformed a corner of her apartment into a workspace, with a second-hand drafting table she found online and a lamp she adjusted carefully so the boys wouldn't wake. Her clients were local shop owners, families expanding kitchens, small business teams hoping to upgrade their layouts. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. And with every successful project, she restored a piece of the woman she had been before heartbreak reshaped her. With each new day, she grew more confident as a mother. She learned how to manage 2 babies at once, how to soothe their different cries, how to stretch her budget without sacrificing their needs, how to rest in fragments, how to celebrate small victories, like the first time both boys slept 4 hours straight. Felicia visited as often as she could, always stepping into the apartment with the authority of someone ready to fight the world if it meant protecting her sister and nephews. "Look at you," she would say, eyes softening as she watched Bethany prepare bottles with a calm efficiency that came from practice. "You're doing this, not barely surviving, not just coping, doing it." And with each visit, with each long-distance phone call, with each late-night conversation about bills or milestones or fears, Bethany found her strength growing, not in sudden bursts, but in steady waves. She was no longer the woman who boarded a plane in tears. She was a mother. She was a provider. She was expanding, not collapsing. Her sons were her center. Her work was her anchor. Her community was her cushion. And through every struggle, every long night, every uncertain step, one thing became clear. The woman she was becoming was far stronger than the one Craig tried to discard. He had no idea who he walked away from, no idea who she would grow into, and no idea how much she would accomplish long before he ever saw her again. 4 years reshaped Bethany Brown slowly, like steady waves carving strength into stone. Her apartment, once small and unfamiliar, had grown into a home filled with toddler laughter. Wooden blocks, stacks of sketches, and the warmth of memories stitched together through sacrifice. The twins, Samuel and Peter, transformed from fragile newborns into energetic boys who ran through hallways with superhero capes made from old t-shirts. Life was not easy, but it was full. Each year brought new milestones. The first time they crawled. The first time they said mama. The first time they took wobbly steps toward her as if she were the safest place in the world. Those moments fortified her. Motherhood became a discipline, not a struggle. She learned how to balance grocery bags and diaper bags at the same time, how to stretch her finances with precision, how to keep working even when exhaustion whispered doubts into her mind. She was no longer surviving, she was building. Her architectural work grew in quiet layers. The small drafting jobs she once relied on evolved into larger collaborations. Local shops recommended her. Community centers asked for her input. Nonprofits paid her to redesign outdated facilities so residents could have better access to resources. Her proposals were thoughtful. Her lines were clean. Her concepts respected the people who would use the space. This made her stand out. Bethany never pursued fame or recognition. She simply wanted her designs to help others the way architecture once helped her navigate grief. But in a city that celebrated innovation, meaningful work never stayed hidden for long. By the twins' 3rd birthday, Bethany's name occasionally appeared on community boards and design forums. When they turned 4, a mid-sized Bay Area firm reached out requesting revisions on a commercial redevelopment plan. She delivered the project in half the expected time with twice the clarity. That job opened a door. The firm invited her to consult on a proposal for a larger project, a redevelopment site in a growing district. It was ambitious. It was high profile. It was the kind of assignment that could shift her career into a new realm. The invitation arrived in an email while Samuel and Peter were coloring on the living room floor. Bethany stared at her laptop, blinking in disbelief. "Mommy." Samuel tugged at her sleeve. "You okay?" She smiled, pulling him close. "Better than okay." She accepted the invitation within minutes. The weeks that followed were intense. She worked late after putting the twins to sleep, reviewing site maps and community reports, shaping a design that honored people rather than profit. She revised every detail multiple times, refusing to deliver anything less than excellence. Her final presentation was scheduled in a sleek downtown office building. The very idea of standing before executives, many of whom had far more resources and connections than she did, made her pulse quicken. But she reminded herself who she was now. She wasn't the scared young woman Craig dismissed. She wasn't the overwhelmed mother, unsure if she could handle 2 babies. She wasn't the temporary consultant overlooked in corporate hallways. She was a designer with a voice, a mother with purpose, a woman who rebuilt herself without bending for anyone. On the morning of the presentation, she woke early to prepare breakfast for the twins. They ate scrambled eggs and fruit at the table while she tied their shoes, checked their backpacks, and kissed their foreheads before walking them to daycare. As she hugged them goodbye, Peter pressed a drawing into her hand, a stick figure family with 3 smiling faces. "This is us," he said proudly. Bethany swallowed the swell of emotion in her throat. "I love it." She tucked the drawing into her bag and headed downtown. The building hosting the meeting was polished and modern, all glass walls and clean lines, an architectural testament to confidence. She entered the lobby, greeted by a receptionist who directed her to the 23rd floor. As the elevator ascended, Bethany steadied her breathing. She had faced childbirth alone. She had faced poverty without crumbling. She had faced nights where she questioned everything yet still rose the next day. A presentation could not break her. The conference room was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. Executives filed in one by one, setting down folders and exchanging polite greetings. Bethany arranged her materials with professionalism, adjusting her prints and setting her laptop in place. She didn't know the building belonged to a subsidiary of Balfour Holdings. She didn't know who would walk through that door. She didn't know she was seconds away from confronting a past she had long closed. When she began presenting, her voice held steadiness. She walked the room through her design choices, traffic flow, community integration, accessibility features, environmental considerations. Her confidence filled the space. The executives nodded, impressed by her clarity. Then the door opened. Footsteps entered behind her. She didn't turn. Her focus stayed on the blueprint displayed on the screen, but the room fell quieter. That slight shift in energy, subtle yet unmistakable, signaled that someone of significance had arrived. A voice she once knew cut through the space. "Please continue." Bethany's stomach tightened. She turned slowly. Craig stood there, looking older, sharper, tense, but unmistakably him. For a split second, the air left her lungs. She met his eyes with a calm she earned through every hardship of the past 4 years. Her expression didn't crack. Her posture didn't falter. She reminded herself of the woman she became, not the girl he dismissed. "Of course," she said, turning back to her presentation. Craig remained silent, but his gaze stayed fixed on her. He wasn't looking at her like a man observing a consultant. He was looking at her like a ghost from his past suddenly stepped into the light, stronger than he imagined. She finished her presentation flawlessly, and when she packed her materials to leave, she didn't wait for him to speak. She didn't owe him acknowledgement. She didn't owe him anything. But Craig, shaken by the woman she had become, couldn't look away. The next chapter of their intertwined fate began the moment she walked past him, steady, graceful, unchanged by his presence. But his world? It was no longer intact. Bethany hadn't anticipated how calm she would feel as she stepped out of the conference room, portfolio in hand, heart steady despite the shock of seeing Craig after 4 long years. The hallway outside buzzed with muted voices from adjacent meetings, but the air around her felt strangely clear, like the years of struggle had gathered into armor she no longer needed to consciously wear. She moved down the corridor with measured steps, aware of her growth in a way she had never been before. She no longer felt like the young woman who once stood trembling in front of Craig's desk. She was someone rebuilt by experience, responsibility, and the daily demands of motherhood. But inside the room she had just left, Craig remained completely still. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He watched the door long after she disappeared behind it, his breath caught somewhere between disbelief and regret. The moment she began presenting earlier, Craig felt a shift he couldn't name. He had arrived late due to a prior briefing with senior management, expecting a typical consultant pitch, graphs, data, proposals he'd skim over with detached interest. Instead, he walked into a room held together by the presence of a woman he once tried to erase from his life. Bethany stood at the front of the conference table with poise he didn't remember. She didn't fumble her notes. She didn't shrink when executives asked for clarity. She delivered her proposal with the ease of someone who understood not only her work, but also her worth. He studied her quietly from the doorway before stepping inside. Her hair was pinned gracefully, revealing the focus in her eyes as she gestured toward a projection of her design. Her voice carried steadiness, mature, self-assured, crisp. He remembered her as thoughtful, yes, but not like this. This was a woman sharpened by responsibility and expanded by resilience. He took a chair slowly, as if afraid the moment would shatter if he moved too quickly. As she continued explaining her concept, Craig found himself seeing the years he missed, not in flashes, but in the confidence radiating from her posture. He noticed how she no longer filled space cautiously. She commanded it. She understood the value she brought, something he never gave her the space to realize. She looked complete, and he had contributed nothing to that journey. When Bethany turned pages in her portfolio, each motion struck him harder than the last. He noticed the firmness in her shoulders, the calm precision in her hands, the light confidence in her tone. She spoke about community integration and design equity with conviction, emphasizing accessibility and practical function. The executives nodded in approval. Craig felt his chest tighten. This wasn't the woman he dismissed. This wasn't the woman he pushed away. This wasn't the woman he told was nothing. This was a woman who had built herself without him. It rattled him. When her presentation ended, the room echoed with genuine appreciation. One executive leaned forward. "Your approach to community use is impressive. It's refreshing to see someone prioritize ease of movement instead of forcing layout trends." Another added, "This is the most thoughtful proposal we've reviewed in months." Bethany smiled politely, but did not bask. Praise did not inflate her. It simply affirmed what she already knew. Craig kept his gaze trained on her. He wanted to speak. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to say something that acknowledged the weight of the moment. But words failed him. Bethany gathered her materials with deliberate calm. Her hands moved steadily, not hurried, not shaken. She slid her laptop into her bag and folded her printouts neatly. She didn't look at Craig again. She didn't need to. Her silence toward him was not bitter. It was resolute. It was the kind of silence that forms when a person has outgrown a wound and refuses to reopen it. When she finally stepped toward the exit, she nodded respectfully to the room, not to Craig, and left without hesitation. The door clicked shut. Craig remained seated, staring at the empty doorway. One executive spoke to him, unaware of the personal history simmering beneath the surface. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" Craig swallowed hard. "Yes, she is." The response was simple, but inside him, something was unraveling. Not theatrically, not loud. It was a quiet fracture, the kind that shifts a person's entire worldview without warning. He sat in stillness long after the meeting adjourned, ignoring the buzz of his phone, the reminders from his assistant, the follow-up questions about scheduling. His mind replayed the same image. Bethany, confident and composed, moving through the room with a grace he never nurtured, and yet she had blossomed anyway. He rose slowly from his chair, the weight of 4 lost years pressing into his spine. He walked toward the window and stared out at the city, its towers reflecting the setting sun, its streets alive below. He asked himself a question he wasn't sure he could handle. What else about her life had he missed? Bethany stepped out of the building, inhaling the cool afternoon air. She didn't look back. She didn't need validation from the man who once broke her. Her validation lived at home, 2 little boys whose faces lit up whenever she opened the door. She walked toward the train station, unaware that Craig followed minutes behind, unable to let the moment go. Transformation had occurred, not just hers. His world had begun collapsing, one realization at a time, and he wasn't prepared for what he was about to see next. Craig exited the building only a minute after Bethany, but the distance between them felt immeasurable. She walked with purpose, her bag resting against her shoulder, her steps steady and unhurried. He followed from far enough back that she wouldn't notice, though even he couldn't explain why he was doing it. It wasn't entitlement this time. It wasn't ego. It was something quieter, heavier, an ache he didn't recognize because he had never allowed himself to feel it. The city moved around them with evening noise, the low rumble of buses, crosswalk signals chiming, conversations drifting through the air. Yet Craig heard none of it. His attention stayed locked on the woman ahead of him. Each step she took reminded him of the years he missed, not as a punishment, but as a truth he could no longer escape. Bethany boarded a train, and he slipped into the next car, maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. She stood near the doors, holding onto a rail while scrolling through her phone. Her posture remained calm, but Craig could see fatigue in her shoulders, the kind of tired that comes from carrying responsibilities far beyond oneself. He wondered how many nights she stayed awake with a crying child, how many mornings she pushed forward despite exhaustion, how many days she carried the weight of a life he refused to acknowledge. He wondered how many people had stepped in when he hadn't. The train rocked gently as it approached her stop. She stepped off into a quieter neighborhood lined with eucalyptus trees. The houses were modest but well kept, each with small front yards and warm porch lights. Craig followed cautiously, his pulse unsteady. He didn't know what he expected to find. He didn't know if he had the right to find anything at all. Bethany approached a compact 2-story building with a soft yellow porch light. She reached into her car, parked in the driveway, to grab something. When she opened the back door, Craig's world stopped. 2 little boys sat in booster seats, swinging their feet impatiently, their faces lit with excitement the moment they saw their mother. They were identical in a way only twins could be. Round cheeks, expressive eyes, curls that framed their faces. But Craig saw something else. Their eyes. His exact childhood eyes. A shock shot through him so hard he had to grip the lamppost beside him to remain upright. His breath vanished. His pulse pounded unevenly. Bethany smiled warmly at the boys as she unbuckled them one at a time. "Come on, Samuel," she said gently. "Your brother's turn. Samuel. Pete." Craig couldn't hear the second name fully. The blood rushing in his ears drowned out everything except the sight in front of him. Samuel climbed into her arms with a giggle, wrapping himself around her neck with the eagerness only a child has for the parent who never lets them down. She kissed the top of his head and set him on the driveway. Then she reached for his brother. The second boy leaned forward, mimicking Samuel's laughter. Craig staggered backward. The twins, his twins, moved with the same expressions he once had in old family photos. The slight tilt of the mouth, the soft crease between the eyebrows when curious, the bright gaze that scanned everything. He watched one of them point excitedly at a leaf on the ground. The other tried to imitate the gesture, bumping into his brother and breaking into an infectious laugh. Craig's chest tightened painfully. They were beautiful. They were alive. They were unmistakably his. A tremor ran through his hands. He lifted one to cover his mouth as if trying to suppress a sound, but no sound came, only the hollow thud of realization dropping through him like a stone. I told her to get rid of them. I told her she was nothing, and she raised them without me. Bethany didn't look in his direction. She was too focused on her boys, fixing Samuel's jacket, brushing crumbs from Peter's shirt, carrying their daycare bags along with her own. Her strength hit him like a blow. Craig felt the ground shift beneath him. His breaths turned uneven. He stepped back farther into the shadow of a tree, unable to move forward and unable to walk away. This moment, this revelation, tore open every lie he had told himself. He had convinced himself Bethany moved on easily. He had convinced himself she didn't keep the pregnancy. He had convinced himself that losing her was for the best. In truth, he had lost more than her. He had lost 4 years of first steps, first words, birthdays, laughter, scraped knees, late-night stories, and morning cuddles. He had lost the chance to hold them when they were small enough to fit in one arm. He had lost being present for the moments that shape fathers. He pressed a hand against his chest, overwhelmed by a heaviness he had never known. Tears threatened but didn't fall, not because he was holding them in, but because he didn't know how to let them out. His world, the one built on legacy, wealth, and control, felt flimsy compared to the life Bethany created with 2 little boys who had no idea he existed. Bethany guided the twins toward the front porch, one holding each of her hands. Samuel stumbled slightly, and she caught him with instinctive ease, adjusting his backpack strap with a tired but devoted expression. Craig felt something inside him crack. That should have been me. I should have been there. I should have known them. I did this to myself. He blinked hard, his jaw tightening as the truth cut deeper. This wasn't an inconvenience. This wasn't a complication. This wasn't a mistake. This was a family he rejected. Bethany unlocked her door and ushered the boys inside. Their small voices floated back into the quiet street, asking what was for dinner, arguing playfully, calling Mommy in perfect unison. She stepped in after them and closed the door. The porch light dimmed. Silence swallowed Craig whole. He stood there for several minutes, rain misting lightly across his hair and shoulders. His mind raced with memories he wished he could undo, words he wished he never said, choices he wished he could reverse. He hadn't just lost Bethany. He had lost time, precious, irreplaceable time, with children who shared his face and his future. And he couldn't blame anyone but himself. He turned away from the house slowly, walking back toward his car with an unsteady gait. He stopped once, halfway down the block, to wipe at his face with trembling fingers. But the tears never came. He felt hollow instead. A hollow man staring into the remains of a life he once believed he didn't need. And somewhere deep inside him, a realization cut through the shock like a blade. This moment wasn't punishment. It was truth. And the consequences had only begun. The next morning arrived quietly, the sky still dim as Bethany dressed Samuel and Peter for daycare. The boys were bright and chatty, unaware of the weight forming around their mother's thoughts. She tucked their shirts in neatly, brushed their curls with practiced gentleness, and tied their shoes while humming a tune she learned from Milwaukee street corners years ago. Her mind drifted only once, to the unease she felt the night before. She couldn't explain it, but something in the air around her home had felt unsettled, a pressure she couldn't name. She shook it off. She had work to prepare, children to raise, bills to pay. Fear had no place on her schedule. The boys held her hands as they walked to the car, their laughter rising like tiny bursts of sunlight against the early morning chill. They climbed into their booster seats with playful bickering about which one got to press the seatbelt button first. Bethany smiled at their usual antics, grateful for the brightness they brought into every space. But the moment she pulled into the daycare parking lot, her stomach tightened. Craig stood near the entrance, not in a suit this time. No polished demeanor, no arrogant posture. He looked out of place, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the pavement, shoulders bent slightly forward as if weighed down by something he could not carry. Bethany froze. Every muscle in her body tensed. The boys didn't notice him. Their world was too busy with crayons, snacks, and playground chatter. They hopped out of the car and rushed ahead, backpacks bouncing against their backs. Craig lifted his gaze when Bethany approached. "Please," he said quietly. She stopped a full 2 feet away, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" His voice cracked the moment he tried to speak. I needed to see you, to talk, to explain." "I don't owe you anything," she replied, her tone calm but firm. He swallowed hard. "Bethany, I didn't know. I didn't know they existed. I had no idea you kept the pregnancy. If I had—" She cut him off sharply. "If you had what? Not said the words you said? Not shoved a check across the desk? Not told me I was nothing?" He winced. The words hit him harder, spoken aloud than they had in memory. She leaned closer, voice low and unwavering. "You said everything you needed to say that day, and you said it clearly." "I was wrong," he whispered. Bethany laughed, but the sound carried no humor. "Wrong? Craig, wrong is forgetting an appointment. Wrong is misplacing a document. What you did wasn't wrong. It was intentional." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence stretched between them. The hallway door opened behind them, and a daycare worker waved the boys inside. Bethany didn't look away from Craig. "This isn't the place," she said finally. "Not in front of my children. Not today. Not like this." "I understand," he murmured. "No," she replied. "You don't." She stepped past him and entered the building, her back straight, her movements controlled. Craig didn't follow. He simply stood there, watching her disappear behind the glass doors, wishing, desperately, that he knew how to undo 4 years of destruction. For the rest of the day, Bethany moved mechanically. She completed revisions for the consulting firm, replied to emails, reviewed community feedback for her design proposal. But every now and then, her mind flashed back to Craig's face outside the daycare, pale, strained, devastated. She hated that she noticed. She hated that she felt anything at all. When she picked up Samuel and Peter later that afternoon, their smiles grounded her again. Their tiny hands wrapped around her arms, their excited voices sharing stories of their day reminded her that everything she needed was already here. Everything she had built, everything she protected. That night, the boys fell asleep quickly. Bethany kissed their foreheads, tucked the blanket around them, and slipped quietly into her small workspace. She turned on the lamp, the warm glow falling across her drafts. She tried to focus. She couldn't. Her hand shook once as she drew a line on a blueprint. Then again, and again, she placed the pencil down and rubbed her palms against her thighs, willing her thoughts to settle. A knock sounded. Sharp, sudden, too late at night for visitors. Her breath stalled. The second knock came faster. She stood slowly and walked to the door. When she opened it, the cool night air swept in, and standing in the doorway was Craig, drenched, breath shallow, holding a small envelope in one trembling hand. Bethany's voice dropped to a cold whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I had to come," he said. "I know you don't want to see me. I know I'm the last person who deserves forgiveness. But I need to try." "You had your chance," she snapped. 4 years ago." He stepped forward slightly. She stepped back. "I'm not here to excuse anything," he said. "I'm here because I saw them, and I lost it. I can't believe what I missed. I can't believe what I did." Something in his voice cracked, something raw and unfamiliar. Bethany crossed her arms tightly. "You don't get to walk in here and announce your grief. That grief belongs to the mother who stayed, the parent who tried, not the man who told me to make a choice that went against everything I was." He nodded slowly, accepting every word like a blow. Then he held out the envelope. "What is that?" Bethany asked. Craig hesitated. I thought this was the way to fix things, to do right by them." Alarm flashed in her eyes. She snatched the envelope from his hand and tore it open. Her breath stopped. The world tilted. The pages blurred before her vision regained focus. A legal document. A petition. Full custody. She looked up at him, not with anger, but with a depth of betrayal that made his chest collapse inward. "You're trying to take my children?" she whispered. "No," he said quickly. "No, You signed this. My family, the attorneys. You signed this." Her voice shook, sharp enough to cut through the night. He reached toward her. "Please, Bethany, listen." She slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. His voice cracked on the other side. "Bethany, please. That's not what I meant. Please let me explain." She locked the door with trembling hands. The knocking continued softly, then desperately, then not at all. Bethany slid down against the door, her breath breaking, her body folding as tears finally surged free. Her palms covered her face as years of strength trembled under the weight of a new, violent fear. "They're trying to take my sons." The woman who had rebuilt a life from ruins now felt the ground beneath her shake. And the chapter closed with her curled on the floor, finally allowing herself a moment she never permitted before, a moment to break. Bethany stayed on the floor longer than she expected, her back against the door, her breath trapped somewhere between fear and disbelief. The quiet of the apartment felt heavy, too. Heavy, interrupted only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of a car passing outside. She wiped her face roughly, forcing her hands to steady. "No," she whispered to herself. "They are not taking my boys." Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. She didn't hesitate. She pressed Felicia's name and held the phone against her ear as if it were oxygen. Her sister answered before the second ring. "Beth, what's wrong?" Bethany didn't trust her voice at first. She inhaled shakily. "Fal, something happened." The shift in Felicia's tone was immediate, sharp, alert, the way she spoke when switching from sister to lawyer. "What happened?" "He came," Bethany whispered. "Craig, he came to the house." Silence. Then, "Did he threaten you?" "No, not verbally. But he brought—" Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard. "He brought a document." "What document?" Felicia asked, already anticipating the answer. Bethany stared at the pages scattered around her on the floor. Legal terms, court filings, custody petition, his signature. "Full custody," she said softly. Felicia didn't curse, but Bethany could hear the sharp inhale on the other end. "Send me everything. Now." Bethany snapped pictures with shaky hands and sent them through. The moment the files delivered, Felicia spoke again, this time in her courtroom voice. "Listen to me carefully. This is intimidation. Nothing else. They think they can scare you. They think you're isolated. They think money gives them power. But we fight this. Tonight." Bethany's throat tightened. I don't want to lose. You won't, Felicia cut in. You have every advantage: physical custody, proven involvement, documentation, stability. 4 years of consistency. He has nothing but money and guilt is not evidence. Bethany closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Thank you. I'm already preparing a counter, Felicia said. Papers rustled on the other end. I'll file first thing in the morning. But Bethany. Yeah? You need to prepare yourself. His family is going to get involved. The words landed like weight on her chest. You mean his father? Yes. A man like Victor Balfour doesn't let anything exist outside his control. If he knows the twins exist, he will push every boundary he can find. Felicia paused. But we will push back harder. Bethany nodded, even though her sister couldn't see her. Okay. And Beth? Yes? Don't open the door again tonight. If he comes back, call me. Across the city, Craig sat in the back seat of his parked car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. He hadn't driven away after Bethany slammed the door. He couldn't. His mind replayed the moment over and over, her face, the hurt, the fury, the betrayal he caused. He stared at the envelope copy in his lap, rereading the filing even though he already knew every word. Full custody, not shared. Full. He felt sick. He hadn't wanted this. He hadn't even asked for legal involvement yet. He had just found out he had sons. The idea of ripping them away from Bethany felt cruel, unthinkable. And yet, here was a petition with his signature on it. Except he didn't remember signing anything. His pulse accelerated. Confusion twisted into panic as he grabbed the document and stepped out of the car, heading straight for his penthouse. He moved with urgency, riding the elevator up with a growing sense of dread. The moment he entered his living room, he went straight to the drawer where important papers were kept. He rifled through folders, contracts, agreements, anything with his signature. He pulled out a past corporate document, signed months ago. He laid it beside the custody petition. His stomach dropped. The signatures were almost identical. Too identical. Perfectly smooth lines. Same pressure. Same angle. Only one problem. He had signed the older document while sitting with his corporate attorney. The custody petition, however, contained details he had never read, terms he had never agreed to, and a goal he would never pursue. His hand shook as he touched the corner of the petition. They forged it. Not by accident, not out of misunderstanding, but intentionally. His chest tightened as realization spread through him like cold fire. His own family had done this. His own father had used his name to launch a custody attack on Bethany. They hadn't even trusted him enough to ask. He sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, staring at the petition with a sense of betrayal deeper than anything he had ever known. Growing up in the Balfour household meant expectations, discipline, and control, but this was something else. This was a violation. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Anything or anyone that becomes a distraction will create problems. He finally understood. Victor never cared about Craig's relationship. He cared about legacy, about image, about maintaining power. Craig pressed his palms against his face, suppressing a groan of frustration and guilt. Bethany thought he was trying to take the twins. The woman he hurt more than anyone else believed he was attacking her all over again. And he couldn't blame her. He had earned her fear. He had earned her distrust. He stood abruptly, pacing the room, heart pounding against his ribs. He grabbed his phone and dialed his father's direct line. It rang once, twice. Then Victor answered. Craig, it's late. Craig didn't waste time. Did you sign a custody petition under my name? A pause. A long one. Too long. Then Victor replied calmly. You weren't ready to make that decision, so I made it for you. Craig felt his jaw tighten. You forged my signature. I authorized what needed to be done, Victor corrected. Those children are Balfour's. They belong under our protection, not in some... Don't finish that sentence, Craig snapped, voice cracking with new anger. Do not speak about her life like that. Victor exhaled harshly. You're emotional. I'm furious, Craig corrected. And rightfully so. You lied. You attacked her. You blindsided me. She blindsided you, Victor countered. She ran off pregnant and hid it from you. I'm simply correcting her misconduct. Craig stood still, breath unsteady. This was who raised him. This was who shaped him. This was who taught him to see people as liabilities. He finally saw clearly what Bethany had been forced to face. I'm done letting you control my life, Craig said, and I'm done letting you hurt her. Victor's voice hardened. That woman kept your children away from you. Craig's answer was immediate. No, you kept me away from them. He ended the call before his father could respond. He dropped the phone onto the couch and stood in silence, breathing unevenly. The truth settled around him heavily. His own family had declared war, but he wasn't going to fight on their side. Not anymore. The courthouse loomed against the gray morning sky, tall enough to make people feel smaller than they were. Bethany felt a faint tug of anxiety as she approached the steps, her folder clutched tightly against her chest. She had barely slept. After her call with Felicia, she spent the night watching the twins breathe, memorizing the rise and fall of their small chests as if someone could take it away while she blinked. Now, the world felt louder, sharper. Every footstep on the courthouse stairs echoed deep in her bones. Felicia met her outside, dressed in a tailored navy suit and carrying a stack of documents that looked thick enough to double as armor. You ready? Her sister asked. Bethany inhaled slowly. As ready as I can be. Felicia gave a single nod, precise, confident. Good, because they came prepared to intimidate us. Bethany's brows pulled together. They? Who? Felicia stepped aside. Bethany's breath hitched. Across the courtyard stood Victor Balfour, Craig's father, the man who forged the petition, the man who tried to hide his actions behind wealth and influence. He wasn't alone. 2 attorneys flanked him, briefcases in hand, postures stiff and calculated. Their suits were crisp, their expressions even sharper, like they were already picturing the courtroom as their battlefield. Victor didn't look at Bethany. He didn't acknowledge Felicia. He stood tall, as if the world belonged to him, and this hearing was a minor inconvenience. Felicia scoffed quietly. Typical. Bethany swallowed. He really came. Oh, he's not here to negotiate, Felicia replied. He's here to dominate. Or so he thinks. They walked toward the entrance. As they passed him, Victor gave a curt nod, not to Bethany, but to Felicia, sizing her up the way powerful men often assessed opponents they underestimated. Felicia gave him a stare so cold it could have cracked marble. Craig arrived moments later. He rushed across the courtyard, clearly out of breath. He wore no arrogance today, only the weight of sleepless nights and the look of a man who had lost control of everything he thought he understood. His eyes found Bethany immediately. Bethany, he said, voice low. She didn't answer. Felicia positioned herself slightly in front, eyes narrow. Save it. The courtroom isn't a place for emotional theatrics. Craig swallowed hard. I'm not here to fight her. Your father is, Felicia snapped. His jaw tightened. I know. Bethany finally spoke, voice steady but distant. Let's go inside. The courtroom was smaller than Bethany expected. Rows of wooden benches faced a raised platform where the judge would sit. The air carried an odd mixture of formality and tension, like everyone inside was waiting for something to break. Bethany and Felicia settled at their table. Victor and his attorneys took the opposite side. Craig sat behind them, separate, physically present but clearly not aligned with his family. Bethany could feel his gaze, but she didn't turn around. The bailiff called the room to order. When the judge entered, everyone rose. He was a middle-aged man with firm features and eyes that had clearly seen every type of conflict. Custody disputes, betrayals, lies, desperation. Nothing surprised him. They all sat. Case review regarding custody petition, the judge announced, scanning documents briefly. Petitioning party, Craig Balfour. Respondent, Bethany Brown. Bethany's stomach tightened hearing that phrasing. Felicia rose immediately. Your Honor, we challenge the legitimacy of the petition and request dismissal pending substantiation. Victor's attorney rose at the same time. Your Honor, the petition was filed under correct procedure. The children are of significant interest to the Balfour family. The petition seeks full custody, Felicia interrupted. A move typically reserved for cases of neglect, abuse, or abandonment, none of which apply. My client has been the sole caretaker since their birth. The attorney smirked faintly. The children would benefit from resources. Felicia's voice snapped like a whip. This is not about resources. This is about control. The judge lifted a hand. Let's keep this orderly. Victor stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid and rehearsed. Your Honor, it is our belief that the twins deserve the standard of living afforded to them by their bloodline. They should not be raised in circumstances that limit their potential. Bethany felt her heart thump painfully. Limit their potential. A sanitized way to say her life wasn't good enough. The room grew colder. Felicia stepped closer to the bench. Your Honor, if we are discussing circumstances, let's address reality. Bethany Brown has raised Samuel, and Peter with dedication, stability, and love, while the Balfour family had no involvement whatsoever. Not a call, not a visit, not a cent, not even acknowledgement. The judge nodded slowly. These are significant points. Victor responded. We only recently learned of the children's existence. Felicia shot back. Because your son told their mother she meant nothing to him. Shall we include that in the record? Craig closed his eyes in shame. Victor's jaw clenched. Irrelevant. The present concern is their future. Bethany felt something inside her harden. Her future meant building a home with what she had. His future meant buying one with money. She didn't look away. Felicia continued, My client's income is stable, her home is safe, her involvement is total, her record is flawless. She is not the one whose commitment is in question. Victor's attorney interjected. The Balfour family simply wishes to provide. Bethany couldn't stay silent. Provide what? She asked clearly. The courtroom shifted toward her. A house, a trust fund, a name they didn't ask for. Victor turned to her for the first time, his expression unchanged. A better life. Bethany lifted her chin. A better life does not come from wealth. It comes from presence, something you have never offered. Something Craig never offered until 5 minutes ago. Craig flinched as if struck. The judge leaned back in his chair. This case is unusual. I see two very different worlds before me. Felicia nodded. Exactly, Your Honor. One built on care, one built on entitlement. Victor's nostrils flared. Entitlement? We are protecting what belongs to our family. Every attorney in the room went still. Bethany's breath halted. Felicia moved forward slowly, voice razor sharp. Children do not belong to anyone, Mr. Balfour. They are not assets. The judge tapped his pen. Mr. Balfour, I advise caution with your phrasing. Children are not property. Victor's silence spoke volumes. Craig sat frozen behind his father, a man caught in the crossfire of a war he never intended to start. The judge shuffled the documents on his bench. We will continue. But I will tell you now, this hearing is not favoring the petitioning side. Felicia exhaled quietly. Bethany felt her shoulders relax for the first time that morning. But the collision wasn't over. The judge scanned the paperwork again, frowning. This signature. Mr. Balfour, you signed this petition? Victor opened his mouth. Craig stood up abruptly. Your Honor, if I may. The judge raised an eyebrow. Yes? Craig stepped forward, voice shaky but resolute. And in that moment, the entire courtroom held its breath. He was about to detonate the truth. Craig hadn't planned on standing. His legs moved before his mind caught up, driven by something rawer than impulse, truth. The weight of silence in the room pressed against his shoulders as he stepped closer to the bench. Every eye in the courtroom shifted toward him. The judge observed him with a measured look. You were saying, Mr. Balfour? Craig swallowed. His voice shook at first, but steadied with each word. I didn't file the petition. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Felicia's eyes narrowed with interest. Bethany stiffened. Victor turned slowly, eyes narrowing with warning. The judge leaned forward. Clarify that. Craig exhaled, forcing himself to meet the judge's gaze. I didn't file for custody. I didn't authorize it. I didn't even know the petition existed until last night. Victor's attorney stood abruptly. Your Honor, I must object. You will sit down, the judge commanded without looking away from Craig. The attorney lowered himself, flustered. Craig continued, his tone tightening with controlled anger. The signature on that document. It isn't mine. It looks like it, but I compared it to previous contracts. Someone copied it. Someone submitted it in my name. The judge picked up the petition again, examining it with a new alertness. And who would have done that? He asked. The question hung in the air, heavy as a stone. Craig didn't hesitate. He turned fully toward his father. My family. Bethany felt a shiver move across her skin. She had never seen Craig look at Victor with anything close to defiance. Until now. Victor's jaw flexed, but he spoke with calm precision. You are confused. No, Craig snapped, voice cracking. I'm finally clear. The judge tapped the desk lightly. Mr. Balfour Sr., Did you or anyone under your instruction prepare or submit this petition without your son's consent? Victor didn't answer immediately. His silence was too long, too calculated. The judge's tone hardened. This is a direct question. Victor lifted his chin. The petition represents what is best for the children. That is not an answer, the judge pressed. Craig stepped forward another inch. He forged it. He signed my name. He did it behind my back because he wanted to control the situation. The judge's expression darkened. Forgery is a serious accusation. Craig nodded. Then I'll make it formally. Bethany inhaled sharply. The courtroom felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker, as though years of buried family secrets were finally being dragged into the light. Victor's attorney rose again. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding within the family, Felicia cut in smoothly. A misunderstanding does not involve copying a signature and filing a legal action without consent. That is fraud. The judge nodded, absorbing every piece of information with a critical eye. This petition is hereby placed under review for validity. Until confirmed, it holds no weight. Bethany's shoulders loosened, but only slightly. The fear hadn't fully lifted. What does that mean for custody? She asked. The judge turned to her with a softer tone. Miss Brown, you remain the children's custodial parent. Nothing in this petition supersedes that status. Relief washed through her like a sudden exhale. But Craig wasn't finished. He turned toward his father fully now, voice breaking with old wounds he could no longer hide. You didn't trust me enough to make my own decisions. You didn't respect Bethany enough to speak to her like a human being. You didn't even consider the boys. You just wanted the family name on them. Victor's expression hardened. I wanted to protect the future of this family. Craig shook his head slowly. No, you wanted to protect your power. Silence. Heavy. Unforgiving. Long overdue. Craig continued. You taught me to lead without compassion. You taught me that people were replaceable. You taught me to dismiss anything that didn't fit the image you wanted. He paused, turning briefly toward Bethany. And because of that, I hurt the one person who deserved better. Bethany didn't look away. She didn't soften. She simply listened, her posture steady, protective, guarded. Craig returned his gaze to his father. I'm done letting you decide who I am. I'm done letting you dictate how I treat people. And I'm done letting you interfere in something you know nothing about. Victor stepped forward, voice rising. You will not walk away from your responsibility to this family. Craig took a step backward, not in fear, but in rejection. You're not my responsibility. They are. He pointed toward Bethany and the empty seats beside her where Samuel and Peter's backpacks would have been. My sons, the ones I didn't even know existed because of the man you shaped me into. Victor's eyes flared. The judge raised a hand. That's enough. Both of you. Craig nodded and stepped back. The judge addressed the room. It is clear the petition was not filed properly. I see no evidence supporting removal of the children from their mother. Custody will remain with Miss Brown. Case dismissed pending review for fraud. Bethany closed her eyes just long enough to feel the relief settle into her bones. Felicia placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. When Bethany opened her eyes, Craig was looking at her, not with expectation, not with entitlement, but with quiet acknowledgement. A man who knew he had caused her pain, but had finally taken a step toward the truth. The judge stood. Court is adjourned. The room stirred with movement, papers shuffling, attorneys whispering to clients. Victor turned to Craig with a rigid glare. You just ruined your future. Craig exhaled, shoulders dropping with a release that bordered on liberation. No, I just claimed it. He stepped away from his father, passing him without hesitation. It was the first time in his life he had walked in the opposite direction of the man who raised him. He approached Bethany slowly, respecting the space between them. She met his eyes with caution. You didn't have to do that. Yes, he said softly. I did. For them? She asked. Craig swallowed. For them, and for myself. If I'm ever going to be anything close to a father, I have to stop being his son. Bethany didn't respond immediately. Her breath steadied, her gaze softened, just slightly, just enough to acknowledge the gravity of what he had done. But she didn't offer forgiveness. Not yet. She simply said, I'm taking my boys home. Craig nodded. I understand. And for the first time since their worlds collided again, he stepped back, not because he was dismissed, but because he finally understood boundaries. As Bethany and Felicia walked out of the courthouse, Craig remained standing in the quiet aftermath, watching the woman he once broke lead the life he could have been part of, had he chosen differently. Today was not redemption. It was the first honest step toward it. The morning after the court hearing felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a long storm. Bethany stood at the kitchen counter, preparing oatmeal for Samuel and Peter, while the kettle hummed softly behind her. The boys, still half asleep, sat at the table rubbing their eyes, unaware of how close their lives had come to being uprooted. Bethany watched them for a moment, letting the sight steady her. This was why she fought. This was why she refused to bend. But beneath that strength, exhaustion lingered. Her body still held the tension from the courtroom. Her hands still remembered the weight of the petition. Her heart still replayed the moment Craig exposed his father, stepping into a truth that cost him everything. She hadn't processed any of it yet. There had been no time. As she set the bowls in front of the boys, Samuel looked up at her with concern hidden behind his usual curiosity. "Mommy, are you okay?" She forced a gentle smile. "I'm okay, baby. Just tired." Peter leaned his cheek into his palm. "You want a hug?" Her chest tightened. "Always." They scrambled off their chairs and wrapped their arms around her waist, warm and soft. She closed her eyes, absorbing their innocent certainty. The certainty that she would always be there, always be enough, always be their safe place. "Thank you," she whispered into their hair. After dropping them off at daycare, she returned home alone, the apartment feeling heavier without their voices. She sat on the couch, not to rest, but to breathe in a way she hadn't allowed herself to do since last night. Her world had shifted. Craig's world had fractured, but her boy's world needed to remain steady. That became her priority. She pulled out a notepad and made a list. Boundaries, decisions, steps. She needed clarity, not reaction. No unscheduled visits. No emotional chaos near the boys. No space for manipulation or guilt. Everything in writing. Everything in service of stability. She drew a line under the list. She wasn't closing the door entirely, but she wasn't opening it wide either. There had to be control. There had to be order. There had to be a way forward that did not throw her boys' lives into turmoil. She wasn't protecting her pride. She was protecting her children. Across the city, Craig sat alone on a park bench overlooking the water. He had left the courthouse yesterday feeling hollow but strangely clear-headed. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't thinking about investments, projects, or quarterly projections. He wasn't thinking about expectations. He wasn't thinking about legacy. He was thinking about two boys he barely knew, and the woman who raised them without bitterness toward her sons, even after he had abandoned her. The wind pushed lightly at his hair as he stared at the waves hitting the shoreline. He didn't know how to rebuild a life from this point. His position at the company wasn't safe anymore. Exposing the forgery publicly had guaranteed a brutal fallout. His father's influence stretched far, and the consequences would show up soon enough. But surprisingly, he wasn't afraid. Losing the company wasn't the same as losing years with his children. One was replaceable. The other wasn't. He leaned his elbows on his knees, exhaling slowly. He didn't want control. He didn't want ownership or power, or to decide anything for Bethany. Not anymore. He wanted a chance, not to rewrite the past, but to participate in the present. But wanting a chance was different from deserving one. He respected the difference. Later that afternoon, Craig found himself walking toward Bethany's neighborhood. He didn't go to her door. He didn't intend to. He stood across the street, looking at the small home where Samuel and Peter lived, absorbing the quiet reality that this place, simple, modest, warm, was where life had unfolded without him. He didn't approach. He wasn't invited. And that mattered now. After a few minutes, he turned away, heading back toward the main street with a new conviction pulsing in him. If he wanted to be part of their lives, he had to earn it. Through consistency, through humility, through patience, not through pressure or entitlement. He walked several blocks before pulling out his phone and drafting a message to Bethany. "I won't show up unannounced again. Let me know when you're ready to talk. I want to do this the right way." He hesitated before hitting send, but he meant every word. Bethany heard the message tone while folding laundry. She read the text once, then again. She didn't respond immediately. Not because she was angry, not because she wanted to punish him, but because she needed space to think. She placed the phone face down and stared at the basket of the boys' clothes. Tiny shirts, mismatched socks, superhero pajamas. Each piece reminded her how much she had carried alone, how much she had sacrificed, how much she refused to lose now. Craig wanted to rebuild himself. Good. But that journey had nothing to do with her. Not yet. She picked up her phone again, typed 3 words and sent them. Not today, Craig. She put the phone away and returned to folding clothes. Her boundaries were firm, not cruel, just necessary. This wasn't a reunion arc. This wasn't forgiveness on demand. This was healing with caution. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Bethany stood near the window, looking out at the quiet street. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman who had walked through fire and built a life she refused to let burn again. For the first time since the court hearing, she allowed herself a long, controlled breath. She didn't know what Craig's place in their future would be, but she knew this. She would choose the path. She would set the rules. She would protect what mattered. Her world had changed, but she wasn't afraid of the next chapter, because she finally understood something she hadn't recognized in years. She wasn't standing in the ruins anymore. She was standing in the aftermath of triumph, and the path forward, whatever it looked like, would be walked on her terms. 2 days passed before Bethany allowed herself to slow down long enough to think clearly. Life returned to its usual rhythm. Daycare drop-offs, client emails, drafting sessions at her table, Samuel and Peter chasing each other around the living room. Stability wrapped itself around her again, but not in the same way it had before the custody scare. She held the twins closer. She watched them with sharper attention. The fear hadn't vanished. It had simply settled into a quiet reminder of how fragile safety could be. On the 3rd morning, after she dropped the boys off, her phone buzzed. A message from Craig. If you're willing, I'd like to talk today. Not about custody, not about the past. Just about how to move forward without hurting anyone. Bethany stared at the words longer than she intended. They weren't demanding. They weren't guilt-laced. They weren't manipulative. They were restrained. She appreciated that. But she didn't respond right away. Instead, she brewed coffee, sat at her drafting table, and watched the steam drift upward. She had learned the importance of pausing, of choosing her reactions intentionally, not emotionally. She wasn't the young woman who once sought approval from a man who dismissed her. She wasn't the one who felt small in conference rooms or powerless in the shadow of wealth. She was a mother, a provider, a woman who had rebuilt her entire life from nothing. She would answer when she felt ready, not when Craig felt ready. Craig, meanwhile, sat in the lobby of a co-working space he had rented temporarily. He wasn't returning to the Balfour building, not after the way his father glared at him as they exited the courtroom, not after the attorneys tried to salvage the family's reputation with rushed phone calls and whispered contingency plans. He needed distance. More importantly, he needed direction. He had spent the morning opening a blank document, typing and deleting words that all seemed insufficient. He didn't know how to rebuild his life yet, but he knew one thing with certainty. He wanted to rebuild it honestly. He checked his phone again. No reply. He set it down and forced himself not to stare at it like a lifeline. If she responded, good. If she didn't, he would try again another day. He wasn't entitled to her time. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. Bethany's reply came just after noon. We can talk. Outside the cafe near the daycare. 4:30. 10 minutes. No assumptions. No expectations. Craig exhaled. Part relief, part nerves. 10 minutes. Clear boundaries. Direct terms. He respected every line she drew. He arrived early, sitting at an outdoor table shaded by a small awning. The street bustled with people heading home from work, students passing by with backpacks, a dog tied to a post anxiously watching its owner inside the cafe. Then Bethany approached. She wore a light jacket, her curls gathered loosely, a neutral expression on her face, confident, controlled, unreadable, in the way only someone who had survived emotional devastation could be. Craig stood out of courtesy, unsure whether she wanted the gesture. She gave a brief nod, not approval, not disapproval, simply acknowledgement. She sat. He sat. The air between them felt heavy with things unsaid, but neither rushed. Bethany spoke first. You wanted to talk, so talk. Craig laced his fingers together to keep his hands steady. I want to understand how to be part of the boys' lives without disrupting them. Or you. Bethany held his gaze. You're not starting from neutral, Craig. You're starting from negative. You know that. He swallowed. I do. Good, she said softly. Because I'm not interested in rewriting history or pretending the past didn't happen. Craig nodded. I don't want that either. Bethany continued. I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know when I will be. But forgiveness is not what you should be aiming for. Stability is... Her words struck him, not cruelly, but truthfully. She leaned back slightly. I'm willing to consider letting you be around the boys at some point. But it won't be fast, and it won't be unstructured. They don't know you. They don't owe you anything. I understand, he said quietly. And their lives don't change overnight because you've changed your mind, she added. He closed his eyes briefly, taking the words in without resistance. I know. Bethany watched him for a long moment. There was no softness in her expression, but no bitterness either, just clarity. She had spent 4 years building a safe world. She wasn't going to let anyone approach it loosely. She spoke again. So here's what I need. No surprises. No unannounced visits. No calling the daycare. No attempts to take shortcuts into their lives. His voice was steady. You have my word. And if we take steps forward, they will be slow, measured. Their comfort comes first. Of course. And if at any point I feel the boys are overwhelmed or confused, we pause. He nodded. Whatever you decide, I'll follow. Craig didn't realize until that moment that the permission he'd been hoping for wasn't access. It was guidelines. A map. A direction he could follow without causing harm. Bethany folded her hands on the table. You're trying, Craig. I see that. But trying doesn't erase everything, so we do this carefully. Thank you, he whispered. She didn't respond to that. She simply stood. Their time was up. We'll talk again, she said. But not today. And maybe not tomorrow. He rose as well. Whenever you're ready. She nodded once and walked away, her steps confident, unhurried, steady, as if each one was a reminder of the life she built and the boundaries she now protected with precision. Craig remained standing until she turned the corner, a quiet resolve settling inside him. This wasn't the beginning of a reunion. This wasn't the softening of her heart. This was permission to try. And that was more than he expected, more than he deserved, more than he had hoped for. He sat again, staring at the empty chair she left behind, and whispered to himself, Don't mess this up. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. To himself, to her, to the 2 boys he hadn't met yet. A promise to move forward with care, humility, and patience. The gentle approach had begun. The following Saturday arrived quietly, the kind of morning where sunlight eased through the curtains instead of pushing its way in. Bethany moved through her routine with calm focus. Breakfast for the boys, a quick clean of the living room, a load of laundry humming in the background. Samuel and Peter raced toy cars along the coffee table, giggling loudly, arguing over whose car was the fastest in the whole world. They were happy. They were safe. They were hers. She watched them for a moment, her chest warming the way it always did when she saw them lost in their own little world. Nothing about their joy hinted at the emotional earthquake she had weathered to protect it. And that, to her, was victory. At 10:03 a.m., there was a knock. Not a pounding, not an urgent knock, just 2 steady taps. She inhaled slowly. She already knew who it was. Samuel looked up. Mommy, someone's here. Peter trailed behind his brother. Is it Miss Jordan with muffins? No, baby, she answered with a soft smile. Not today. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked to the door. A part of her, the part shaped by fear and old wounds, tensed. But another part, the one strengthened by growth and clarity, stayed steady. Bethany opened the door. Craig stood there. He wore a simple navy sweater, jeans, and nervousness like a second skin. His posture wasn't confident the way it once was. He wasn't trying to command the moment. He wasn't trying to fix anything through presence alone. He was simply there, hopeful, cautious, unsure. In his hands, he held a children's book about buildings, bright illustrations, simple explanations, small characters learning how cities came to life. He chose it because of her, because architecture was the thread that once tied them together, because he wanted his first offering to their sons to be something that connected, not confused. Bethany stepped aside, not out of warmth, but out of choice. You can come in, she said. His eyes softened with relief. Thank you. He entered slowly, taking in the space he had never seen before. The small couch with textured pillows, the framed photo of the boys at the zoo, the drafting table tucked in the corner, covered with blueprints and rulers. Everything in the home told the story of her life, without him, and he respected every inch of it. Samuel peeked at him from behind the arm of the couch. Peter peeked from the other side, mirroring his brother perfectly. Craig knelt to their level. "Hi," he said gently. His voice wavered, despite his attempt to steady it. I'm your dad." Samuel blinked. Peter blinked back. They looked at each other, the way twins do when they're processing something together. Then Samuel stepped forward and tapped the book in Craig's hand. "What's that?" Craig swallowed. "It's a book about buildings. I thought, maybe you'd like it." "We like buildings," Samuel announced proudly. "Mommy draws them all the time." Peter nodded so hard, his curls bounced. "She drawed a big one yesterday." "Drew," Bethany corrected lightly. He grinned. "Drew." Craig let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Well, maybe someday you can show me some of her drawings." Samuel looked at Bethany. "Can we show him?" Her answer mattered more than anything else in that room. She took a moment, not to hesitate, but to choose. "Yes," she said softly. "You can show him." The boys grabbed Craig's wrist and tugged him toward the drafting table with the unfiltered excitement only children can deliver. Craig followed, overwhelmed, emotional, but grounded. He listened as they pointed out their favorite lines, their favorite shapes, the tower Samuel insisted was as tall as the sky. Bethany watched from a few steps away, not with longing, not with regret, with clarity. She wasn't losing control. She wasn't surrendering anything. She wasn't erasing the past. She was allowing a moment that no longer threatened her. And that was what healing looked like. As the boys flipped through the book with Craig, asking question after question, he answered each one carefully, never speaking over them, never rushing. He let their curiosity guide the interaction. He let their energy set the pace. Bethany noticed the subtle shift. Craig wasn't trying to impress them. He was trying to meet them. Minutes passed like that. Light, simple, warm, not because of him, but because of the boy's innocence. Eventually, Samuel lost interest in the book and declared he was hungry. Peter immediately agreed. Bethany guided them into the kitchen to grab snacks, giving Craig a moment to breathe. He turned toward her, eyes damp. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You don't thank me for being reasonable," she replied. "But you should thank the boys for being open." "I will," he whispered. She held his gaze. "This isn't a guarantee of anything bigger. We're taking this slow." "I know. And one good visit doesn't erase 4 years. I'm not asking it to." She studied him for a long moment, long enough to see the difference in him, small but real. "You're trying," she said. He nodded. "I'm trying to be someone they won't be ashamed of." Her expression softened slightly, not in forgiveness, but in recognition of effort. "Keep trying," she said. "Not for me, for them." A quiet peace settled between them. Not reconciliation, not romance, but closure beginning to take shape. Craig stood. "Whatever pace you choose, I'll follow." Bethany didn't smile, but she didn't shut down either. "That's the only way this works," she said. She joined the boys in the kitchen, the sound of their laughter weaving through the air. Craig lingered in the living room for a moment, absorbing the atmosphere he had once forfeited, the warmth, the life, the calm. He didn't try to hold on to it. He simply appreciated that he had been allowed inside it, even briefly. When he left an hour later, Samuel waved both arms wildly, and Peter shouted, "Bring another book next time." Craig promised he would. Bethany watched from the doorway as he walked down the steps, not triumphant, not broken, but humbled and reshaped. The door closed gently, not as an ending, but as the beginning of a new, healthy boundary. A life rebuilt on strength, not wounds. A future guided by intention, not fear. Bethany exhaled with steady confidence. Growth is a choice. Pain can shape you without defining you. And peace, real, earned peace, is sometimes the greatest victory a person can claim. She looked at her sons, her heart full. Her story wasn't about getting him back. It was about getting herself back. And she had. Before you go, share this video with someone who needs hope today. You never know whose life a story like this can strengthen.